Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Here we are again. It's yet another edition of your favorite podcast. Well, one of them, I hope. It's talking books and writing and poetry and books and movies and records and music and stuff like that. But today, talking writing and poetry with Catherine Graham, award-winning poet, teacher, writer, podcast host. We'll get to that in a moment, from Toronto. So, Catherine Graham, thanks for joining us for this session today.
Thanks so much for having me, Dennis. I'm delighted to be here today.
And I'll just start off by asking right away, when and why did you actually first start seriously writing?
Yeah, that's a really key question and a core question for me. Thank you for asking that, because I don't think I would be a writer otherwise. I was a student at McMaster University, and I was an undergrad there studying psychology. And my mother died my first year of cancer. She'd been battling that during my teenage years. And then, so I had sort of the slow watching death. And then in my last year of university, the beginning of my last year, my father died in a late night car accident. So that was the end of my family unit. And through grief, poetry found me. And it really became a lifeline. I was seeing a therapist. A worried friend suggested that I see a therapist, and the therapist suggested that I keep a journal. So I started to let things out on the page, and of course it wasn't a cure, but it helped me to have some kind of personal relationship with the grief and all the overwhelming feelings. And then one day I just sort of went into this portal of imagery and music of words and the image of the quarry. We grew up beside a water-filled limestone quarry, and I came out and I was energized by the experience. It wasn't just a venting or letting things out on the page. And I knew something different had happened, but I didn't know quite what that was. And I eventually shared what I had written with a friend, a close family friend, and she said, "You're writing poems. This is poetry." So I knew what poetry was. I did well in English, but no offense to men with beards and older men, but that was kind of what I thought the poet was, an older man or a dead man with a beard, and not a young woman steeped in grief. I didn't have any role models in that way. So that really was the pivotal moment, and I knew something essential to my lifeline was in that moment. And so poetry's been the core of my world ever since. And so there you go.
In a nutshell, you said poetry found you, and I've heard that from other people. I remember talking to the musician Kim Mitchell, and he says, the songs are out there, I'm just their road manager. So
I love that. Yeah, I think there's such a connection to this in-between space that we experience as humans, and as particular as creators, and this sort of liminal space. It's like a frequency, and it's like tapping into things sometimes. And so I really connect with that. And I find too, there's just sometimes these moments that just open up, and there's a poem there, or you feel sometimes you're gifted with a line, and they don't happen in a planned way or a willed way. They happen unexpectedly. They happen, I think, when you're open sort of in a sort of relaxed kind of manner, and that sort of space to take in the creative process and to connect with it. So I love that. Yeah.
Now, your book that we have now right in front of me, Put Flowers Around Us and Pretend We're Dead, Catherine Graham, new and selected poems. So how far back does the collection go?
Well, it goes back 20 years, which I still find hard to believe, because as writers, we know facing the blank page makes everything new again. So you're in this constant sort of relationship with the unknown, and can I do this again, and what's going to happen, and letting all that go and just moving into play and possibility. So, and I'm really grateful to have this collection out, and I'm very grateful to the relationship that I have with my editor, Paul Ramirsch. He's the one that suggested that we do this, and I knew it was sort of in the works for a while, but it seemed sort of down the pipeline, and then he said, let's do it this year, as in 2023. So he's been my editor through all of my poetry books since I returned to live in Canada. I studied in Northern Ireland, and I first published in Northern Ireland. Even though I'm Canadian, I kind of started my journey overseas. And so when I came back just over 2000, I met Paul, and we've been working together on my poetry books ever since. So he was the one who said, let's do the New and Selected, and so here we are. And it just came out a couple months ago, so it's still pretty fresh.
It's pretty fresh. What do you hope the book does for readers and for yourself?
Well, I guess it's really so much about letting go, and it's not my sort of journey anymore. It's the reader's journey, so it's however the reader wants to connect to whatever is in the book. I think there's that place, too, of how there's things that poetry connects and can bring things out of us that are often hidden and buried. And so for the reader to open up something and to have perhaps a memory come back, or a line hit them in a certain way, or an image, or just be even not sure what this poem means is all just about the reaction of what it is to be alive. And so I think poems can do so many things all at once, and then also do different things at different times. So it's really whatever natural reaction the reader experiences is really, I think, partly what I think poetry can bring us to, and also the way that it can hold mystery and ambiguity, which I think we're often afraid of. We don't like to not know things. So, and poetry, for me, really explores the unknown and holds the many pieces of the unknown. And so I think that's just such a beautiful thing that it can do.
I seem to be, I'm not inundated, but here at Talking Books Central, we get lately seems lots of poetry books. Do you sense some sort of renaissance in Canadian poetry in the last couple of years, or is that just my imagination?
Well, that's lovely to hear that, Dennis, because I think poetry is so important to me. I can't not see that it is an important place to be and to share and to know about. So I'm very, very warm to hear that. I think that particularly during our lockdown time, it was a place to really go inward, and I think that inwardness led to some people to connect to their inner writer selves, particularly through poetry. So that might be part of it. It's an art form that as old as any art form is, and will continue to be with us. And I love that about poetry, because it's always part of who we are. And so I think that's great that more people are engaging in it and reading it and writing it.
And like you mentioned, lockdown time, it seems like maybe the lockdown time unlocked a lot of creativity or hidden things in people, writers. That's another thing we're getting, lots of books that people had lots of time on their hands, as they said, during COVID days, and so poof, out came a book that maybe they didn't know they had. So
that's right.
What did you do during lockdown time, as you call it?
Well, I took one moment at a time, really. It's interesting because there seemed to be sort of this physical relationship with the unknown, like we were living in the unknown, and of course it was depending on what people were going through. There was a whole host of challenges, and but also in that way of going inward, it gave people who are in the creative process or writers time, and time is so essential, of course, to exploring things and to going deeper, because there's that sense, too, of having extended time to really move into what you're writing or exploring. You can't often dip in and out. At least I can't. There needs to be sort of an extended sort of time to sort of move into that space. It doesn't necessarily have to be a long time, but it has to be a certain quality of time. And without a lot of distractions in that way, I think for me, it's hard to know exactly how many poems I was writing during that time, because I just try and continue that through my life, from day to day, week to week, to always sort of connect to the poetic process in some way, whether it's thinking about poems, writing poems. I teach poetry, so there's always something connected to it, so I just keep going with that.
Do you have an actual writing routine, or is it, again, just part of your day-to-day life?
Well, I try to protect my mornings. I find now as a writer, mornings are my sort of juicy space, so to speak. I feel that there's that connection to the dream world, which is that liminal space that I was talking about earlier. And I find my mind is more open to the creative process, and so I try and protect that and not even look at emails or the to-do list and so on. Most of my teaching is in the afternoon, so that's really when I find I can maximize my sort of whatever my imagination can give me in the morning. So. Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned teaching. You teach writing, creative writing, University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. You won an Excellent in Teaching award. So what do you think made that happen? What makes a good teacher in your mind?
Well, it's hard for me to say that in terms of what the students would have received from me, but for me as a teacher, I think it's really important to create a safe space and to realize that writing is a process. And when you're dealing with a group coming from different sort of places of development, oftentimes you have students that this might be their first class, or another person might be a published poet. And I think it's really important to really just say that it doesn't matter where you are on the journey, just go to the next step of wherever that journey takes you. So just to really see that it's about community and not competition, and how our own development is really the key to being a poet, and to really also trust what you're attracted to as a poet too. A lot of my teaching involves sharing poems, and we talk about them, and it doesn't necessarily mean that students have to, quote, like the poem, but what's happening for them as a reader, and why are they reacting like that, and what is the poet doing, what are the words on the page doing there, and also then looking at sort of the craft involved as well. So the more that we talk and discuss that, the more that's internalized within them, and then I feel too that their strength as writers grows week to week, which is really lovely to see.
Now, speaking of poems, what makes a good poem then, or is there any rule?
Oh, there's no rules. That's what I love about poetry. It doesn't want rules, and every time you think this is what a poem is, another poem will say, no, it can be this. So it's endless. And I think, too, that writers and artists always want to break rules, and there are no rules, really, but there are good sort of signposts or things to sort of, I think, hone on to as you develop your skills, because I think it's really important to know why you're doing something and what the poem needs. I think it's so important to listen to the poem. And in that listening, the poem will tell you, and that's the whole process too. It sounds strange, but I know for me, and I know from people that I've talked to too, and students too, they understand that in that creative process, you're trying to find what that poem wants to be, and letting the will and I think it's going to be this go. And doing that, just doing what you can then. So in terms of whether it wants more imagery, or we need to tighten the music, or we need to perhaps work with the line breaks. All of these things matter. The title matters. The space around the poem. So the poem, it's like a dance back and forth. And I think that that's key, to just keep doing that. And the more you do that, the more you get a sense to your intuition will tell you it's done, or it's close to done, or I can't do anything more with it. And then you put it away, and then see if you can do something more with it later. And then sometimes you just say, I'm completely done with it, and let it go.
Catherine Graham is with us. The latest collection or book from her works is Put Flowers Around Us and Pretend We're Dead. How did that title come about?
Yeah, it's interesting because years ago, talking about rules and what you should and shouldn't do as a writer, I remember being told as a young writer that you shouldn't write about dreams. So I took that to heart and was kind of sad about that, because I had a really vivid dream life. And then I just realized what nonsense this is. If there's something there that is speaking to you as a creator, then there's an energy line there to follow. So, and then I realized too, with the dreams that I was having, I'd often be gifted with poems, and I couldn't write them all down in my head because, they evaporate in that space between sleeping and waking. But I could sometimes just grab a line or a word. So I started to keep a notebook beside my bed and in the sort of in between space of half awake, half asleep, scribble what was coming to me down. And one of those lines was put flowers around us and pretend we're dead. And that came from a dream, and then became the title of the new and selected. And it's also one of the poems in the collection too.
And the collection, like we said, is Put Flowers Around Us and Pretend We're Dead. My problem is I have such great vivid dreams, like they're like movies, and I'm following things along and doing things, and then I wake up and can't remember a darn thing. So I couldn't write anything down if I had a notebook, even if I wanted to, because my wife can wake up and go, oh, I had this dream where I did this, and then I did this, and then so-and-so came along, and then this happened, and this happened. And I go, I had a dream about cars. So... Just, I don't know how she does
well,
it.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. I mean, but maybe there's something there, and it's just about sort of training your mind to see if there's something that you can start to sort of capture. And the more you do that, like anything, like any kind of practice, more might come or not. I mean, I just found for me that these lines that I couldn't even make up in my day mind were coming in my night mind. So I thought, okay, these are gifts. So I'm so glad that sometimes when I'm scribbling, I forget to turn the page. So in my, if I've got another line on top of another line, I've lost them both because I can't read them, but I try and do what I can. And because sleep's important to me. I love my sleep too. So.
Oh, good. Yeah, so do I. It's my favorite hobby. We've got, yes, Catherine Graham as a writer, editor, teacher, but you're also, such as us, a podcaster, the Hummingbird Podcast. Tell us about that.
Oh, yes. Fellow podcaster, the love that goes into such a venture. And I'm a podcast host with Jessica Outram, and the two of us do the Hummingbird Podcast together, and we talk about creative process and writing and life and nature and art and friendship. It's just a joy to participate in that podcast place with her. And so, we've been doing that for a couple of years now, and we were approached by WNED PBS to be part of their Amplify app, which was such an honor. And so we just, we'd be doing it if we had one listener, Dennis. We just love it so much. And so we're so grateful when we hear from listeners, as you probably know, and that sense of community and connection. And it's lovely to share the experience with her as well, too. We met years and years ago, probably about 20 years ago, too, when I first came back from Northern Ireland. And we've been friends ever since, so it's really lovely to have this connection together and share that sort of, again, liminal space, because she was in Coburg and now she's in Peterborough, and I'm in Toronto. So we do this through the computer, and but we're in this space together, and we're on hiatus now for the summer, but we'll come back in September, October to start the new season.
And how do we find it? It's just, is it up there for everybody to find?
Yeah. We've got a website, the Hummingbird Podcast, and we're on all of the podcast venues from Apple to whatever they all are.
I know.
You can find us. Yeah.
You can find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Exactly.
Put Flowers Around Us and Pretend We're Dead, the latest collection of poems from Catherine Graham. What's next for you, or does it just happen organically?
Well, it does seem to sort of happen organically when I look back. So right now I'm in sort of that listening stage to sort of see what it is that the next project will be. Although I have to say that I am actually working on poems that will go into the next book. So that's kind of been the focus. But I'm going to be returning to Northern Ireland in a few weeks, too, to do some readings there. And just honored to return and to read from the new and selected. As I say, I started as a student there, so this is a beautiful full circle moment for me to return, and I never would have dreamt that I would have a new and selected when I was a young student. So it's really special to be coming back and to be reading there. And I used to read at the Lennon Hall Library, books and so on, and sit at the cafe and do my writing. And I'll be reading there, and then also at the Heaney Home Place with other writers as well and a musician. So just getting ready to go overseas.
Oh, good. Well, you can say hello to Northern Ireland for Talking Books podcast for us. Why not?
I will.
Okay. We want to thank you for your time today, and we'll let you get back to your, well, I guess it's almost noon where you are, so get back to your noon routine, and maybe we'll hook up again sometime.
That would be lovely, Dennis. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.